Welcome to Plato's Cave. I'm Jordan Myers, and I'm a master's student in philosophy at the University of Houston. You're listening to a reading group episode of the show, which means that in this episode, I discuss the paper The Importance of Free Will by Susan Wolf with three non-philosopher friends, Adam, Giffin, and Brian, because philosophy shouldn't just be for philosophers. And so, this episode is a continuation of the moral responsibility and free will series, and this episode was really spawned by the previous discussion of Tamler Sommers' The Objective Attitude. One paper or one view that he pushes back against very strongly in that paper is this view put forth by Susan Wolf, talking about the psychological and moral importance of a belief in free will, or the expression of what P.F. Strawson coins the reactive attitudes. So this is, in a lot of ways, kind of a follow-up on the previous episode. And if you haven't listened to that one, I would strongly recommend doing it. And this was a follow-up on that episode, both intellectually, but also in several ways emotionally. I think Adam, myself, and Giffin specifically came into this kind of charged a bit from the previous disagreement. And we, verbally sparred quite a bit in this episode. I think it was a great episode. I think this is an amazing paper. I really, benefited in my understanding from this discussion, from this episode. So I hope that you enjoy it as well. And with that preamble out of the way, here is our discussion of Susan Wolf's paper, The Importance of Free Will. Okay, nice. All right, well, I know, Adam and I were talking a little bit before you guys joined the Skype call, Zoom call, about this paper, and I'm actually really excited to get into it because I need to figure out exactly what I think about it still. And the paper in question is The Importance of Free Will by Susan Wolf, and we're doing this because it was quoted at length in The Objective Attitude by Tamler Sommers, which we did last time. And well, it's interesting because the parts of the paper that he quote are obviously extremely relevant to the paper, but they give at least in my opinion, a different impression of what the paper will be. And I have extremely mixed and probably muddled thoughts about it. But Adam, I'll let you ask the question to the group that you had previously asked, and I cut you off.
Oh yeah, but I was just interested to know what we thought of the paper generally. Did people like the paper?
So I guess I'll answer first. Yes, but with a weird kind of asterisk on it, because I don't know to what extent I really don't know to what extent I agree with. I know there are some parts of the paper that I very, very strongly agree with, and there are other parts where I don't think I agree with, but it's not as much a disagreement as opposed to a different style of agreement. But I don't know, so that's my answer.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I don't really think there was any part of this paper that I disagreed with. So I'd be interested to hear what you have to say, Jordan. Okay. And then I overall just really enjoyed her style of writing. I think
that's interesting. Can I ask you a question about that, Brian? Because I'm just curious. We'll get into it, but like you said that you didn't really find anything to disagree with in this paper, but the previous paper by Sommers was really kind of going against this paper. Was this like a change of heart for you, or do you not see the papers as being in conflict?
I think it was a change of heart after our discussion with Sommers. I think that honestly the discussion about the Sommers paper kind of broke down towards the end there, and it was difficult to tell where people were sitting afterwards. But I think I just had a change of heart.
Okay, that makes sense. Giffin?
I think it was totally worth reading, especially because, like we mentioned, The Objective Attitude, the Sommers paper, is quoted at length at the beginning, and also just in general seems to be styled as a response to it. So it was totally worth the read. I thought it was worth reading, but I didn't find myself in that level of agreement with her, as you guys, for sure. Okay,
interesting. Just
which is probably believable.
Point of reference: it's Sommers, not Sommers.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies, Sommers.
But yeah, the Sommers paper is directly responding to this one. In conjunction with Nagel, as we obviously went over, but that was written in 2007. And this is an extremely formative and hugely cited. Adam and I were talking about how many edited volumes this paper has appeared in. It's like a crazy amount. And this was written published in 1981 in mind, where really, I mean, the 70s and 80s were the explosion of moral responsibility and free will papers in philosophy. Okay, so okay, I really want to just kind of move through this paper because I need to figure out really kind of what I think about it and what the paper is saying and what it's not and how it's saying what it's saying. So okay, there's kind of a tabling. It's the second paragraph of the paper, just to kind of lay it out. She says, in this paper, I shall argue that the justification of these practices being moral responsibility practices, need not rest on the assumption that we do have free will, and that the conclusion that we don't have free will gives us no reason at all to abandon these practices. My argument, however, seems to me to leave both the problem and its importance intact. The thought that our wills may not be free is no less disturbing, even when all ties to the justification of our practices are completely and irrevocably severed. So, just 30,000-foot view, as the title implies, she's implying that the threat of determinism has no implications for the practices of reactive and objective attitudes, and that these practices are remained intact by scaffolding that she'll continue to lay out. But the scaffolding is really what I have some questions about. But let me just skip another paragraph and then I'll read this one. This gives a bit of the layout of the paper. So she says, I shall begin by outlining a naive attempt at expressing the fears of those who find the problem of free will upsetting, and a naive response by those who think that the problem of free will gives us nothing to worry about. This expression of fear and the response to it constitute a first stage of debate, which focuses on the justification of our practices that overt reward and punishment. The inadequacies at this stage of the argument suggest a way of advancing to a deeper stage, which focuses not only on the overt practices themselves, but on the attitudes of these practices typically express. Proceeding by way of two analogical cases, I shall argue that these attitudes too are safe from the threat of being undermined by reason and metaphysics. Nonetheless, I think that feelings of dissatisfaction may reasonably remain. I shall finally attempt to express what I take to be the appropriate focus of these feelings. So I think that that's a nice way of really laying it out. And so, okay, so let's kind of move through the paper really a little bit linearly here. So the first kind of thing that I thought was important to get on the table is just a recap from Strawson. She sets up the debate. She's going to refer to the group. This is the first sentence of the next section. I shall hereafter refer to the group who find the problem of free will upsetting as the pessimists. And the pessimists include all those who believe, first, that whether or not we have free will depends on which metaphysical hypotheses are true, and second, that it is not unlikely that the wrong metaphysical hypotheses are true. Now, the not unlikely, it's like a triple negative, because at first I thought that she was saying the pessimists were libertarians, but actually I think she's saying they're sort of hard determinists. Because this is
it's a little different than that, though, right?
Well,
because it's like it's they're saying that in the sense that that the idea of determinism is not unlikely untrue.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it's they're not gonna put all their chips down necessarily on that idea, but it seems that seems to be the way things are going.
Yeah. So this was the problem is that, I mean, in 1981, like I know a lot of these positions just like get really well defined after this, but a lot of kind of my early questions were about specifically who's being addressed in what parts. And it seems like, because I mean, you're right about that, where she's making like a almost like a probabilistic claim on their behalf, right? But I kind of feel as though the target of that would be someone like a Dirk Pereboom or a Galen Strawson, right? Someone who's like, quote unquote, like a hard incompatibilist. Like, they would say that, yeah, whether or not we have free will or not depends on metaphysical hypotheses. That's a libertarian or a hardcore skeptic. And then they're just saying, no, they're probably not true. That actually wouldn't apply to Galen, because I know Galen Strawson he thinks that determinism isn't actually relevant because it's incoherent both ways.
You mean Pia rather than Galen?
No, Galen. Well, sorry, I shouldn't get into it. Galen actually thinks that even if we were causa sui, like even if determinism weren't true, it wouldn't actually matter. Like moral responsibility practices still wouldn't make any sense.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But basically, so the pessimist is someone who says we don't have metaphysical free will, and what we would need certain metaphysical conditions to be true, and those probably aren't true. So for the purposes of the paper, it's essentially like a free will skeptic, right? Okay.
Yeah, totally.
And then she brings these in who are contrasted with the optimists, who are compatibilists. Now, a lot of the same. I mean, she explicitly cites Strawson's paper, and honestly, a lot of the same kind of questions I have about what constitutes being a compatibilist versus a hard incompatibilist actually means, because it seems like she says that certain things are only open to the optimists, which seem open to both. But that, I mean, it's not really the point of the paper, and I don't want to kind of nitpick about it. I mean, it's just
the optimist is like more about like perspective, right? Like they both sort of like fundamentally agree that it seems as though the arguments for determinism seem sufficient, but it's like how they both kind of view what follows from that. You know, almost like the pessimist has, we'll get into it, but has sort of a almost like a lingering need for something more, while the optimist seems content with the reasons, put forward that justify behavior and attitude, even in the light of determinism being true.
Well, and it seems like she eventually kind of develops this point, but it seems to me also that in her locution, the optimists have to end up being more than just consequentialists about these things, right?
Yes.
Which I agree with. I mean, like in terms of how the camps should be organized, like for there to be a meaningful difference between a moral responsibility skeptic and a compatibilist, you have to be extra consequential about it. Yeah.
Okay. I agree with that.
Okay. Because otherwise I just don't see what kind of, okay. I just wanted to make sure I was reading that correctly.
Yeah, and it's like there seems to be like a distinction between pessimists and optimists, throughout the paper. Even at the end of the dialogue between the optimist and the pessimist throughout this paper. Even once all questions have answers, or at least seeming satisfactory answers, there's still that divide between the two based on their perspective on the issue.
And she says, I mean, there's a remark about that, right? Where she says, we don't need any new information for this debate. It's not like more empirical knowledge is going to come out to actually develop these points, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay. So she trying to kind of think about how to introduce this point. I mean, so she's talking about the she's talking about the justification of certain practices, right? And the one that she's discussing first, because she does note this. I actually had a few notes in the margins about how I thought, that she was making some of the same issues that Sommers made by conflating actions with attitudes or practices with attitudes. But upon rereading this, just for like the introduction, she actually does say that she plans to start on the practices and then switch to the attitudes. So she is making that differentiation. So she's talking about, the practices of rewards and punishments right now and what justifies them. And so, okay, so she makes a point. This is page 389, bottom of the first paragraph. This was one where I just kind of resoundingly said like, yes, agree here. Yeah, so this is bottom of the first paragraph on 389. We do not ordinarily decide whether a word of praise or a public scolding would be a useful directive to future behavior. Rather, we find ourselves reacting to the actions and characters of others, approving of some, disapproving of others. Unless there is a reason to restrain ourselves, we simply express what we feel. Now, I had that highlighted. I wrote true. Like that is just extremely true. Now, again, I don't mean to be kind of nitpicky here, but like there is a little bit of like the conflation between practices and attitudes here. I mean, this seems like it's more a point about attitudes than actions. I mean, obviously they flow from each other, but I just thought that this was, really, it's exactly right. I mean, reacting is almost the derivative or the core of the reactive attitudes. They are those which naturally kind of flow. So I'm assuming, Adam, you also like very deeply agree with that point then.
Yeah, definitely. And I think she does make the distinction at one point pretty well.
Yeah.
Let's find that real fast just to let her make the clarifying point here.
What do you mean actions versus attitudes? Like someone can do a given action, but if they don't have a given attitude, then it's not really genuine?
So that's a good clarifying question, Brian, because this was a big issue with the previous episode that we were conflating about. And I think I tried to kind of highlight this issue, but so there's a difference between an action first of all, there's just a difference between actions and attitudes in the sense that one is obviously kind of your mental status and the other one's what you do, right? So like if I do a given action, the same action could be done for a myriad of different reasons or different attitudes, right? So she's making the point there, and I'll let Adam get to his quote in a second. She's just making the point there that, when you're scolding a child, right? Or you're kind of reprimanding someone, you could be doing that because it is your natural reactive attitude towards that child, or you could be doing it in a very kind of calculated, objective way under the objective attitude where you say, okay, I think that, this person needs to learn, and they will do so if I actually respond to them in this way. Now, it could have been like, this could be a child that needs more gentle encouragement, more kind of firm encouragement, like challenging the child. Like everyone's different, right? But that difference in attitude could be there, but the action be the same. Does that clarify it at all?
Okay, yeah. I think that was actually kind of nice because it's been a while since I looked at the last paper because we did that a couple weeks ago. Yeah. So it's all that shit's coming back. Cool.
Okay, good.
I think this quote puts it well as well. So she says, imagine for a moment what a world would be like in which we all regard each other solely with the objective attitude. We would still imprison murderers and thieves, presumably. We would still sing praises for acts of courage and charity. We would applaud and criticize, say thank you and for shame, according to whether our neighbor's behavior was or was not to our liking. But these actions and words would have a different, shallower meaning than they have for us now. Our praises would not be expressions of admiration or esteem. Our criticisms would not be expressions of indignation or resentment. Rather, they would be bits of positive and negative reinforcement meted out in hopes of altering the character of others in ways best suited to our needs.
That's a great quote of it. So this is why. So back to the quote that I had on 389. This is why. Sorry, Adam, you can stop sharing if you want. So I highlighted that and just wrote like true. Like that seems to be both empirically and psychologically true, right? That we don't actually just ordinarily decide. Usually we just react. But I think that it's obvious that we also can do that too. So we ordinarily just react, but we can actually kind of deliberate about it and decide. And that's like the whole kind of reason why I agree with Strawson that the reactive attitudes are what constitute relationships. And that was my kind of entire point about saying that the objective attitude is usually correlated with like an increased cognitive load. It's I don't know if it's certainly not a sufficient. I don't even know if it's a necessary condition, but it's at least a correlative one. And she says, so she also clarifies in the next paragraph that one can justify these practices under let me just read it. So she says, accordingly, although one can justify these practices in a way that is analogous to justifications of other kinds of actions, one can also try to justify these practices in a way that is analogous to justifications of other kinds of judgment. In particular, one can try to justify them by showing how the relevant judgments are fitting for, appropriate to, or most aptly deserved by the relevant objects to these judgments, in this case, human agents. So she's basically saying, look, like you could ground these in consequentialist reasonings like this. If I do this, it will create a better world. Or you could also ground them by saying, look, like and that to me seems to be where the compatibilist kind of bread and butter is. Like, do you meet certain categories or certain conditions for deserving certain reactions? Right. Adam, is that how you're seeing it too?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, okay, I'm just going to skip it was another point about compatibilists and what they can do or not. Okay, let's just get into the fear, because Adam, introduced like just a wonderful quote from her in that section. So she says, to introduce right before that, she says the pessimist's fear may now be expressed as the fear that if determinism is true, this consequentialist justification for praise and blame is the only justification that would be available to us. He fears that if we discover that determinism is true, we will be rationally obliged to give up making and relying on such judgments. And more important, perhaps, we will be rationally obligated to give up the attitudes which are essentially tied to those judgments. Now, as I think that I would fall into the box of a pessimist, generally speaking. And I don't think that follows. Like, I don't think that is a good pessimistic fear. Obviously, there are pessimists who think that, and it's not obvious why you wouldn't think that. But so I think that like determinism here does take the desert practices off the table, the practices of desert off the table, but most certainly not the reactive attitudes. Now, okay. Okay, Adam, this is a question for you first. Never mind. We're not really at that section yet.
Can I ask a clarifying point? So you believe that God, I can't think.
Was it about what I just said?
Yeah, I completely forget though.
So let me clarify, because what I said was probably a little bit dependent on you being here for like the part one of the series, which was unfair of me. So basically, it seems so my current position is that admitting that determinism is true, right, should take practices of here's what it should do. Admitting that determinism is true should make it such that any punishment practices that we do, especially on kind of third-party levels or like system-wide levels, that should just come down to consequentialist justification. Like, let's actually just do what makes a better world, whether that's punishment or rehabilitation or, deterrent factors. Like that's all. That's what that leaves on the table.
That won't necessarily inform the attitude. That we
yes,
will be,
that doesn't.
So
that
still
doesn't
be reactive.
Well, it doesn't take reactive attitudes off the table. It doesn't make them kind of irrational or incoherent. It doesn't even, and I don't even think that it does that. Well, that's a good question. Does it do that theoretically? Not necessarily, honestly. This is more about the later sections, but just to kind of table it. I think that admitting that determinism is true kind of opens the door to taking the objective stance. And then it's an issue between, okay, what stance do we take in which situations? But now that's my biggest question mark, about this whole paper is her justification for saying that the reactive attitudes aren't taken off the table, because that's what I'm extremely I think I might disagree with her about, but we have to get into it. So, okay. I love so this next section, so she's discussing really, she's actually preemptively talking about Sommers, right? So she says, first sentence of the next section on 390, she says, what the pessimist really fears then is that if determinism is true, we must not give up the practices of praise and blame themselves, but the attitudes and judgments that these practices typically express. We must give up all our reactive attitudes and adopt the objective attitude towards ourselves and each other as we do towards everything else. Boom. That is Sommers' point right there, right? Like he does think that that admitting early Sommers, admitting that determinism is true, then we have to give up all these attitudes, even though the practices themselves on the surface can look somewhat the same here or there. They might change, but they can look the same. Now, okay, so I want to hear what you guys think about this, because I have 100% no disagreements with this. So she says to replace our reactive attitudes with the objective attitude completely, keyword, is to change drastically, or at most would say reduce, the quality of our involvement or participation in all our human relationships. And, she says, this is Adam's quote, imagine what a world would look like there. I love this. Bottom paragraph, 391. The most gruesome difference between this world and ours would be reflected in our closest human relationships, in the relations between siblings, parents, and children, and especially spouses and companions. We would still be able to form some sort of association that could be described as relationships of friendship and love. One person could find another amusing or useful. One could notice that the presence of a certain person was, like the sound of a favorite song, particularly soothing or invigorating. We could choose friends as we now choose clothing or home furnishings or hobbies, according to whether they offer to a sufficient degree the proper combination of pleasure and practicality. Attachments of considerable strength can develop on such limited bases. People do, after all, form strong attachments to their cars, their pianos, not to mention their pets. Nevertheless, I hope it is obvious why the word friendship and love applied to relationships in which admiration, respect, and gratitude have no part might be said to take on a hollow ring. I just love that paragraph. And I'm curious, so Brian, maybe, because I know, Adam, you just wholeheartedly agree with that too, right? Brian, I'm curious, like on the change of heart thing that we were discussing at the beginning, I'm curious now, do you kind of buy that? Do you agree with that more than you previously did?
I think what was missing from last episode was an examination more of what that would look like with real examples. And I think the quote that Adam laid out really is what I was looking for in that sense. I will say that it's hard to imagine what it would be like to completely adopt the objective attitude and to really feel that, and it could be completely fine, and we should of course investigate like moving towards a world and more people adopt the objective attitude, but it's, I don't know, I think just looking at what it would look like to have that is a little bit shocking and a little bit there's a lot of uncertainty there. So I don't know. There would be certainly be something lost, but there could also be something gained. I mean, obviously there's something gained, but maybe it's just maybe it's not loss. But
well, just to clarify, so that picture that she just painted was if you adopted the objective attitude in its totality, like completely, with respect to you at all times and others at all times. It's just your overarching view. Because I don't know actually about Wolf. I don't know actually if she thinks that it's ever, morally permissible to take it or not. Like that's just not really in the scope of this paper per se. But
I took to like adopt it entirely to me basically adopting like feeling it as well, like the I forget what
kind of embodying
the motive. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you can accept that it's probably factually true, but it's not
to really do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how you guys I love that paragraph
So good.
specifically, but the paragraph above I thought was full of
it's all so good.
No, I actually disagree with that one.
Oh, really? Wait.
Which
Paragraph are you referring to?
Yeah, which one?
Let me share my screen and just.
This is intriguing.
I get what she was going for, but I'm wondering whether it's a bit of a straw man here.
On 391.
Yeah, so I'm sharing this. So,
yeah.
An act of heroism or of saintly virtue would not inspire us to aim for higher and nobler ideals. I mean, I don't know why at that point. I mean, I
think
thought
that this
about
is
that.
a stylistic mistake by her too.
I mean, do you get what I'm saying with that? Though?
Because you could,
Adam, I'm actually in complete agreement. I was waiting for you guys to voice your concerns, but I kind of agree with Sommers in that I feel like she takes like amongst all possible like worlds in which you kind of fully adopt the objective attitude, she is kind of leaning on like our preconceptions of what that would be instead of like describing like the possibilities. Like this one seemed a little bit straw man-y. Like she paints like the worst picture if there's like an option for her, in my opinion.
Because I think she can.
It would not inspire us to aim for higher or nobler ideals. I don't see why like the objective attitude would exclude that at all.
Well, let me spell out.
I gotta make this point. So the thing is, like, I think she conflates two different things. Where she mentions like reactive attitudes, and I completely agree with the one she lays out, right? And they seem like they're directed attitudes at certain people, where you imply desert. But in this case, like an act of heroism or of saintly virtue would not, inspire us to aim for higher ideals and nobler ideals. It's like, okay, or higher and nobler ideals. It's like, I don't see how you need directed attitudes.
Yep, I totally agree.
For behavior to influence us in a positive way such that it would inspire us to possibly, you know what I mean? Do you get what I'm saying with that?
Because that act is totally congruent with the objective attitude. You could see an act of heroism or of virtue and then actually just allow that to motivate you to you yourself improve the well-being of others. Like that is exactly.
You could still fully recognize and say, okay, well, ultimately that person isn't agentic. They're not responsible for their behavior, yet this still inspires me. Even if I am not responsible for my own behavior, this can still have a positive influence on my behavior. I thought there were a few moments like this where she kind of conflated the two, and I just wanted to point that out as something that kind of struck my attention. Yeah.
Well, because it's the same point on the negative side, where you can't. She says we would not recoil from acts of injustice or cruelty. It totally doesn't follow from that, because you still obviously could, insofar as they create suffering. Like it's just that simple. Yeah.
Sure. Exactly.
So here's a question then. So modulo what we might say is that kind of stylistic misstep there, right? She just expands the bounds too far. Giffin, do you disagree with her what Adam and I for sure, and I think Brian more so, does think is truly a loss in the adoption of the total objective attitude?
Yeah, I disagree because of her like description as like kind of a loss. And I'm kind of this paper was useful for me because she took avenues that like I hadn't previously thought of. But I do think I still kind of disagree with like that point about like the friendship and love was like the paragraph you're referring to, like where there's a hollow ring with taking solely the objective attitude. This is kind of what I kind of agreed with Sommers explaining, that there's kind of like an unnecessary kind of negative aspect that she's imparting on this. And I don't see it as a necessity that that's what the objective attitude would be like. Like, I don't see it as hollow.
Okay, Adam, can you stop sharing your screen?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I guess,
Giffin, I have a question about that.
Sure, go ahead.
So I wanted to clear something up from last time. And so is it not?
I'll do my best.
So is the objective attitude not negative in your view? Because there's two ways in which it could be less negative than what Wolf portrays.
Okay.
One way is that it has different aspects. The objective attitude entails doing less than she says, which is changing its scope. Or it could be that actually doing everything that she has the scope of the objective attitude doing isn't actually a loss. And actually I really regret not having this for the because what the problem, one like thing I wanted to clear up for like the audience, but even just for us with last time is when we were referring to, and this is my kind of biggest issue with Sommers, but I thought it really degraded even like towards the end of the conversation more than in the paper, is Sommers I think misses something about the way the objective attitude is defined, even in Strawson.
Defined.
Sorry, what?
You said you have a problem with the way Sommers defines the objective attitude? Okay.
So what I'm curious, is if you think that is the objective attitude isn't as negative as Wolf is portraying because it's actually you're viewing it as something different than this, or you view it as this and you're saying, oh, that's actually not that bad. So let me read it real quick.
Sure. This is not from this paper.
No, this is from Strawson, actually. I just found it right before this. So
PF?
Yes. So I'll just read it real quick. What I want to contrast is the attitude or range of attitudes of involvement of participation in a human relationship on one hand, and what might be called the objective attitude or range of attitudes to another human being on the other. So he's for the first time defining the objective attitude.
It is from the paper we read?
This is from Freedom and Resentment, yeah.
Okay.
Even in the same situation, I must add, they are not altogether exclusive of each other, but they are profoundly opposed to each other. To adopt the objective attitude to another human being is to see him perhaps as an object of social policy, as a subject for what, in a wide range of sense, might be called treatment, as something certainly to be taken account of, perhaps precautionary account of, to be managed or handled or cured or trained, perhaps simply to be avoided, although this gerundive is not particular to cases of objectivity of attitude. The objective attitude may be emotionally toned in many ways, but not in all ways. It may include repulsion or fear. It may include pity or even love, though not all kinds of love. But it cannot include the range of reactive feelings and attitudes which belong to involvement or participation with others in interpersonal human relationships. It cannot include resentment, gratitude, forgiveness, anger, or the sort of love which two adults can sometimes be said to feel reciprocally for each other. If your attitude towards someone is wholly objective, then though you may fight with him, you cannot quarrel with him. And though you may talk to him, even negotiate with him, you cannot reason with him. You can at most pretend to quarrel with or reason with him. So that's like the big sense in which I think Sommers is missing it, and I think Wolf nails it on the head. So I'm curious what you think.
Yeah. So I guess this is like one of the biggest differences between like the previous set of conversations we had and like the conversations we're having now, is that I actually like saw Sommers like kind of definition in his framing, and I thought like that was useful. I see how it is different from what Strawson proposes. Like the problem is like Strawson, I kind of now view like what you just laid out. It's not a very good like definition. It's like a sentence that seems to explain, or a series of sentences that seem to explain, like, I guess in a way he's trying to define it, but it's not very concise. But he kind of implies, if that is like strictly like what he's defining as the objective attitude, I mean, then he's basically saying that it is by definition a loss, because he's saying like taking the objective attitude excludes some forms of love. Like he's saying that point blank.
Though not all kinds of love. Yeah.
Right. Meaning that taking the objective attitude exclusively would by definition exclude certain kinds of love, whatever he means by that.
I think he's implying via viewing someone as an object.
Well, I guess it depends on how we are framing like the use of the object in that term. I was just going to say, I see Sommers as having kind of clarified because P.F. Strawson to me isn't like the most clear writer. So I thought Sommers kind of had like the job of like kind of clarifying like what is the objective attitude, except not defining it with like the word love in it and things like that. As like treating someone as someone. Let me rephrase this, because do we want to pull up like Sommers' definition?
Well, no, I know it off the top of my head.
Jordan, I actually agree with Giffin on this one. I mean, not on like the overall point, but I think Giffin's entirely right in the sense that like Strawson brought us the objective attitude, which is, fantastic in that he did it. But I think Sommers perspective is wholly consistent with the objective attitude in this sense. Now, let me clarify. So the objective attitude is the idea that, in the light of determinism, can we have these directed attitudes toward people? No. So Sommers is saying, okay, now, does it have to be this dreary view that P.F. Strawson takes? No, in the example of love, you can't love someone, but you can love that someone is there or that someone exists. You know what I mean? And that's wholly consistent in the light of determinism to say that you love that someone exists, that someone is there, but you can't love them in the sense of reactive attitudes. Do you see his framing there?
Well, I don't think that that's how the objective attitude is defined by either author. So it's not like, I don't think the objective attitude is saying you can't have reactive attitudes. I think that the can't having reactive attitudes is a consequence of taking the objective attitude.
Okay, I don't see how that's different than what I said there, because the idea is that
maybe it's just stylistic.
Yeah, because it's
Jordan, can you maybe try to explain again?
No, because it's the attitude you're taking, right? Mm-hmm. So in this case, you wouldn't say that you love someone or you resent someone, but you could resent the fact that someone behaved that way, or dislike the fact that someone behaved that way, or love the fact that someone is there or that someone's in your life. So when you're we're debating with Giffin, you can't bring up like P.F. Strawson's framing because it's a perfectly fine framing, but Sommers just has a different framing that is consistent with determinism.
Well, it's consistent with determinism. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So my point is that like it's a different take on the objective attitude. Do I still think it's a degree removed from reactive attitudes in the sense that even that slight framing of it, or that difference, almost like I love that someone is there in my life like that, rather than I love that person. I think there's like an attitudinal difference there that detracts. I totally agree with that.
Qua viewing someone as an object,
agent, or
so maybe it's just stylistic, but like the only thing that I would want to include in that definition is this is all like qua object, that these things are being degraded, because if you're not viewing...
Can you clarify what you mean by object here? Because I don't mean to quibble, but that's kind of an important detail, because we in like common use the word object in a different way, and it's a negative way.
Well, just non-agentic.
Well, it's not. It doesn't have to be negative. Yeah.
I'm just asking you to clarify a little bit, just for that reason. But that's part of my problem with Wolf in general, is that there's always like a negative slant, and object is a word with like a preconceived notion of it being negative. That's all I want to bring up.
Well, Giffin, I mean, the way I see it is like this: taking the objective attitude is viewing someone non-agentically and viewing them as, possibly the most wonderful, complex robot we've ever encountered, but at the end of the day, they're still a robot, and you're going to actively view them that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by non-agentically, I mean like, just to clarify, if we're speaking the same terms, we mean like treating them as if they are not some kind of causa sui agent with sort of a contra-causal force of nature, right? Something like that. Did that?
I don't think it necessarily. I don't know if a necessary condition is libertarian free will, but it's like Nagel had that one quote. It's viewing actions as events and people as things. Right. So it's it's a great one. Yeah. So it's demoting. Well, under Sommers' view, it's not demoting. It's changing someone's status from an agent to an object.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just wanted to understand if you guys viewed agent in this kind of framing as a non-deterministic kind of framing.
You could treat someone, if I treat someone as an agent, I can believe determinism is true and treat them as if they were agentic. That's like
as if they were agentic, as is almost kind of ignoring for the communication between the peoples that determinism is true.
Sure,
but hang on. Actually, I think this is actually a really good point at this point to like transition forward, because the thing is that exact point does come up in the paper. So
actually. Okay, that's the biggest question.
And that's one of the most interesting parts of the paper. So let's make sure we're moving forward on that front.
Guys, I hate to do this, but can I get like a 3-minute break? I'm sorry, I'm being called.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure.
I deeply apologize. Give me one moment.
Yeah, and considering this is just like the break right now, I mean that's one of the most interesting parts of the paper. So let's make sure we get to that. For sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. See, yeah. What was I gonna say? I lost my train of thought. Yeah. Well, so just a quick clarifying point between like us then. So my biggest issue still with the way that like Sommers defines the objective attitude is, where's the quote? I mean, he says, taking the objective attitude commits us only to regarding human beings as creatures who cannot deserve praise or blame. But like that seems to be a feature of the objective attitude, and it's certainly a necessary one, but it's not a sufficient condition. Because you could because of this point. This is actually, I'm about to make an extremely Frankfurtian point. Adam, you might like this. Okay. This is about to be a point in the same style as Frankfurt's PAP point. Because someone could not deserve praise or blame, but that's not enough to define the objective attitude. Here's why. You step on my foot, Adam. I turn to you in anger, and I am blaming you for doing that only upon realizing that it wasn't actually you who stepped on my foot. It was Brian. You no longer deserve praise or blame, but it has nothing to do with taking the objective attitude towards you, because I could still harbor reactive attitudes towards whoever stepped on my foot. It's the same point Frankfurt makes.
I think it's generally though, right? Like that one shouldn't adopt, reactive attitudes in general though.
But so creatures who could not deserve praise or blame. Okay, so same thing then. But let's table what I actually do to Brian. So you don't deserve. So in this example, it's the same point that Frankfurt makes about could have done otherwise. You don't deserve praise or blame, but it's not because I'm taking the objective attitude. It's because you didn't do it.
I think that you've lost me a little bit on this one. I'm sorry. What is? No, I'm still super open to this though. What just kind of maybe build me back up on this point here.
Okay. Taking the objective attitude commits us only to. So okay. So first of all, he says like commits us only to doing this. So therefore, I'm interpreting that as if we don't deserve praise or blame, that's all you need to say that that's taking the objective attitude. And I think it's more than that.
So just stop there and let me think about it for a second here. So okay, so I'll pretend to be Sommers here just for a second, okay? So okay. I just so we can just play along with this one. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's sufficient because at that point we're either going to be living in discordance with the facts or in accordance with the facts at that point, because there needs to be a attitudinal shift given that fact that ultimately no creature deserves praise or blame.
So you can say that follows from determinism, but again, the problem there is he's conflating desert practices with attitudinal practices. Now I'm not saying that you can't do that, but if you're going to do that, you have to make that logical connection, right? Because he says robust moral responsibility, right? So that's like the desert entailing kind. And he says that in the paper, but then he'll go on to talk about attitudes, right? But we're about to get back into this with the Wolf paper. Those clearly exist on different planes. So my issue is that someone could either deserve praise or blame or not, but it have nothing to do with taking the objective attitude in that Frankfurt style point. It's just a point to say, okay, look, you've defined it as this. It's the exact same thing Frankfurt does with the PAP. You're saying moral responsibility is removed via you couldn't do otherwise, but here's a situation which you couldn't do otherwise, in which that's not actually the thing.
I'll have to think more about that because I don't fully get it, but that could just be
let's
me.
return to the wolf.
That could be me.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys.
That's fine. Let's return to the wolf paper because we were about to get to what is definitely the most, in my mind, contestable area of the paper. So there are. So let's actually. Okay. Let's flag. I want to return to page 392 but I actually think that we should return to that after we go over Wolf's reasons. So she says on page 393. So let's talk about. So she says, so she introduces this as saying, like, insofar as we take reactive attitudes towards ourselves and each other, however, we regard others as free, responsible beings. If determinism is true, then by continuing to take these attitudes, we live in such a way that is discordant with the facts. And so she says, the reason for doing this is that because we've admitted determinism is true, but acting with the reactive attitude is viewing people as if they were agents, but we know that they're not. Therefore, she's setting up this tension. Like, how can we still retain these attitudes? And she says that this is like the pessimist's fear. So this is bottom of this page going into the next page. And this sets up her different cases, which is definitely the most interesting area of the paper. So she says, even to this last account of the pessimist's fear, I believe that the optimist has a reply which should make the pessimist withdraw his attempt to express and explain the threat of determinism yet another time. For I believe that even if determinism is true, and even if this implies that as a matter of metaphysical fact, we are not free and responsible beings, this gives us no reason at all to regard ourselves as unfree, unresponsible beings. Okay, so that's her claim, basically, of the paper. So even if determinism is true, and even if that is a metaphysical fact, that we're not free and responsible, that gives us no reason to regard ourselves as unfree, unresponsible beings. AKA, that's no reason to reject reactive attitudes. And she actually goes deeper than this and even says, like, practices of desert, which is something that I don't know that I agree with at all. But
I know you wanted to go back. Did you want to read the section real fast about the two potential reasons the optimist might raise?
Let's just talk about them real quick. It's one is living in accordance. Are you talking about the living in accordance with the facts is an imperative?
No, because
which page is this on?
Let me find it real fast here because I think this is worth touching on just because this is a point that you hold.
Okay.
Let's see here.
Because I know there's some stuff on 392 I want to circle back around to, but maybe it actually makes more sense to do it now. 390. Conclusion.
Okay. Yeah. Here we go. It's on 392. Yeah. Okay. So let me read these here. Let me just start at the top of the page. So it is such a world in which the pessimist fears we would be rationally obliged to live if we came once and for all to the conclusion that the thesis of determinism was true. It is such a world so much bleaker and more barren than our present world, to which the pessimist fears the truth of determinism would rationally force us. Once the optimist recognizes just what is that the pessimist fears is at stake, however, the optimist once again has a ready reply. One thing he can point out is that even if the truth of determinism would give us some reason to regard ourselves differently, we would be psychologically incapable of changing our attitudes in the appropriate way. But I think this is the one that Jordan holds. Another is that even if the truth of determinism would give us some reason to regard ourselves differently, we would have an overriding reason to keep the attitudes we currently hold. So,
so this, I actually had multiple things in here highlighted because this is super interesting. So, okay, to the first point, she says, like, if this is a world in which, like, the pessimist fears we live in, right, then we would have to, remove these practices and attitudes, right? But, like, she's right. I think about what the total objective attitude, the ubiquitous objective attitude would cost psychologically, right? Like that would, and Adam, I know you agree with this, and like Brian more so, that would actually be a terrible world to live in. So it's not actually, so I think there's a huge blunder in this kind of area of her reasoning, because the pessimist has open to them consequentialist reasoning, right? Like this is like Wolf has admitted this. So if that's true, and let's even if we were psychologically capable of doing this, because she says we're not, and I agree, but even if we were, so I actually don't think that that's a very good reason for it, because even if we were, it would create a worse world. So if you believe what Adam and I believe, so if the pessimist has open to him consequentialist reasoning, and adopting the objective attitude creates worse consequences, then it need not follow logically from admitting that determinism is true. What I think it does do is it opens the door to the objective attitude. Look, people aren't causa sui, people are determined. Therefore, the objective attitude makes sense to take. It could be true of people to take that view, but you need not always take that view, because it would ruin like life itself, as qua Wolf.
But almost like, given Giffin's position here, even that is still like a subjective point of view. So the thing is, like with that second point right there, it's that even if you had some reason, and in Giffin's case, it could be maybe reduced suffering in certain areas, or it could be the idea that we're living in accordance with the facts, and that's a value that we hold, as she points out.
Yeah,
you could have some reasons, and you would argue that, okay, you have some reasons, but those reasons are dwarfed compared to what we could have to lose. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What we had to lose by losing the reactive attitudes. But the reason I wanted to bring this up was because what I found crazy when reading this was, after reading this, and you read, what was that, 393, she's like, in fact, there is no reason. So, so it's like, even if you think that, even if it's inconclusive on your end, whether you are unsure whether, maintaining the reactive attitude versus letting the reactive attitude go, how those reasons balance out. I'm going to argue that there's no reason. Yeah, there's no reason, in fact. So I think I had to mention that, because it's going to be, she's kind of building that up here.
Yeah. Well, and this is, so it makes sense. So this is interesting. Oh, okay. This is helping me understand the paper more. So this is actually why she needs to do that later on, say that there's no reason, because she's already set it up as that's the standard she needs for there to be no reason then. Yes. Whereas, so that's where Wolf, excuse me, that's where Wolf and I differ then, is because, so I don't ground it in the same way she does, I guess.
Well, I think she's just going through almost like some sort of dialogue here, in a sense. Like you might get off the train earlier, in the sense that you look at this and you say, well, with regard to the consequences of, jettisoning the reactive attitudes, the buck stops here. Like they're worth keeping just based on the arguments in favor of maintaining the reactive attitude. We don't need to go further. We don't need to assess the reasons for potentially, foregoing the reactive attitude and adopting the objective. But she goes further in this conversation.
Yeah. And just to clarify for Brian, maybe, because this could sound weirdly contradictory to what I was maybe arguing before. Brian, I'm not saying the reactive attitudes completely or like all the time. But I'm saying the reactive attitudes as a default in relationships. Wait, did anyone?
I can't hear Brian.
Yeah, Brian, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. I would say a reactive. Wait, okay, so you should have a reactive attitude towards relationships. Is that what you're saying?
You should default to the reactive attitudes in relationships. But obviously, even within relationships, there are reasons to supersede those with objective ones. But I actually, Radzik which she has a paper which we'll definitely read in this series about this. I actually view it identically to her. She says that that the reactive attitudes, because of what they bring to interpersonal relationships, are a prima facie good, but they can be overruled by other considerations. That's exactly how I view it for interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, but
it'll be interesting to read.
So Brian, like just kind of where we're at right now, and stop me if I'm just kind of reiterating points you already understand, but just to make sure you're on the same page here, because I know you didn't go through part one, but she's saying, okay, I've given some good reasons from the optimist point of view for why one shouldn't be a pessimist in the face of holding the reactive attitude in light of determinism. So no one's responsible for who they are. Ultimately, we're not responsible for our actions. But, here are some reasons that, someone could adopt and keep, or not just adopt, but retain the reactive attitudes. And that could be, number one, she kind of points to like the cognitive load in a sense, where it's like we're kind of programmed to, maintain the reactive attitudes. But even more so, the reasons we have for maintaining the reactive attitudes seem stronger than those of adopting the objective attitude. But we're about to go into the page here where she says, okay, even if you think the reason for adopting the objective attitude, in this case, the reason would be living in accordance with the facts of reality. Even if you think that's a good enough reason, I don't think it's a reason at all. So she's about to get into that of like why she doesn't think it's how it's even a valid reason. Did that make any sense?
Yeah.
and just to clarify one more point for Brian, this is with respect to adopting the objective attitude, just always and completely, like Sommers' project, because she's not saying what Course Guard might be saying, or what she might be logically committed to saying, which is that the objective attitude is never appropriate. That's not like the scope of this paper. You know what I mean? Just because that is a weird difference. Yeah.
So Giffin, you're still sitting at like the point where, reading that paragraph, you might, when Jordan and I read that there might be some reason, to regard ourselves differently, you would view it as a good reason to regard ourselves differently. One that might override our, almost our assumed reactive attitudes.
Can you actually repeat that? I didn't fully grasp what you were asking.
Is there like a baby?
Well, what's going on? Yeah, what's going on here?
My dog is whining. Sorry. This is what I had to take a break for earlier. He's whining. Sorry, Jordan, you're gonna have to edit this.
There'll be some editing again.
I apologize. Hold on.
Well, let me pause here because I do want to get that answer.
Yes.
So just to make sure that's where he's at. That there are.
Sorry, the problem has resolved itself. I really can't do anything about it. I know. I'm sorry. I deeply apologize.
But
anyways,
Giffin,
do you want to stop sharing, Adam? And then.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
The people want to see the dog.
Ask the question again. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yes. So Giffin, when Jordan and I read in that paragraph there that, although there may be some reason to adopt the objective attitude and forego our naturally assumed reactive attitude, do you read that as there is a good reason to forego the reactive attitude and that there are good reasons for adopting the objective attitude?
This is a very interesting point because this is like where she introduced the concept of the like living in accordance with, the truth or whatever. Like that was kind of like with the facts. Sorry. That was kind of a lens which I hadn't even thought to apply, to be frank. Like I never really investigated why like that reasoning was kind of like by default taken in my mind almost. So I guess I'm going to give some sort of explanation. I hope it captures like the answer to your question. But in general, I can see like this is like purely the kind of consequentialist lens here, why it might be better for one to take like the reactive attitude. But but to me, it comes off in the same way as Sommers described, like the case of Joshua with like the religion, if that makes any sense.
Did you mean to say react?
Yeah. But I think with this one, like, I just want to make kind of like a quick distinction in the sense that.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I just want us to differentiate between behavior and attitudes here once again.
Yeah.
Like, so do you think that there are better reasons for adopting the objective attitude? Because I think behaviorally we might all actually agree that maybe, like, in terms of how we maybe conduct ourselves. I mean, I don't know, there could be some gray area there, or how our legal systems are structured, that they should be, created and just formed around the concept that determinism is true, and maybe adopt the objective attitude in that sense.
Sure.
And just look at the lens through consequentialism. But I'm looking at attitudes here. Do you think that there are superior reasons for adopting the objective attitude rather than maintaining the reactive attitude
in their totality?
Okay. So this is the thing where I'm kind of not sure. So I'm interested to see how we can kind of converse about this. Because I understand that, like, consequentially for like us, like in the world we live in right now, there are some of the reasons we discussed in the previous episode. Things like the, in our world, higher mental load of taking the objective attitude, and like the kind of feeling we get, or most people get, in adopting the objective attitude. Like, it can feel kind of negative for people. Like, I understand that, like, if you're kind of just looking at like the utility of, well, Jordan.
Sorry, I'm just curious. Are you saying that? Are you juxtaposing you to people? I'm curious, kind of how you're viewing this, because
I'm trying to say, like, I'm basically trying to take a differentiate between like kind of an ideal world here and like the kind of practical considerations for the world we live in right now, because I don't know that Adam clarified which one he wanted me to talk about, or both.
But your perspective on just like how you would view, like interpersonal relationships, and how you would just view others that you care about. I mean, do you think that, like, it just kind of, after kind of hearing about the two different attitudes, do you think that there are possibly superior reasons for adopting? I mean, because like, let me just throw you a bone here in the sense that, sure, like, as you just mentioned there, Wolf does go on a bit, and I actually agree with her that, living in accordance with the facts, and and she uses like the term true reality, in a sense that, like, you want to exist.
It's generally a good reason
in accordance with true reality, and that's a value we do hold.
Right.
So that could be one reason, right? Yeah. That one could prefer the objective attitude over the reactive attitude. I'm just real quick. Okay, yeah.
Can I say the interesting, and this is what I want to know from you, Giffin, like, is that reason going to be like, oh yeah, that's a totally valid reason, and it supersedes the costs of the objective attitude? Because at this point, I don't know if you think there are costs, or if you're with Sommers where you think that there aren't any costs, or that it's actually this dual benefit. Because on the previous because on the previous episode, we were talking about the benefits of the objective attitude that had nothing to do with this more theoretical living in accordance with the facts. It was because the objective attitude was better on its own grounds. So is it a bonus that we get to live in accordance with the facts, or does it supersede the downsides?
I don't know that I view living in accordance with the fact as like an overpowering, like, kind of, if you imagine like a ledger, or like a pro con list or something like that, right? For
some scale.
Sure. Like, I don't think I view the living in accordance with the fact necessarily as like an infinite kind of thing.
Of course.
That'd
be insane. Yeah.
Well, I'm just clarifying.
Yeah. No, I'm agreeing.
But I think I do find myself, I should clarify. I do find myself agreeing with kind of the notion that in all cases, it is preferable to live with accordance with the facts versus not. So in every, like, obviously there are situations, and this is where I was bringing up like the Joshua case from the Sommers paper. Like, there are clear consequentialist reasons for like not trying to convince the elderly person lying in a hospital bed
on their
like do not have free will. Like,
don't you get it? There's no God.
Not only is there no God, you have no free will. You live in an experiment world.
There's just no point to that. Yeah.
No. So like, I was never like that out of it. Okay. Like I completely understand that, like, practically, for that woman on the bed, like, you would just be letting her die in pure suffering.
Sure.
Well, I mean, it's a very, very strong example, but that's just to illustrate the point that, like, I would, concede the practical angle here. But I do feel myself of the opinion that, like, in every case, like in that case, if you took like the pro con list, it would be a negative that you're like not living in accordance with the facts.
But hold on. Wait, Adam, my original question.
Okay.
Oh, are you just going to re-ask it?
Yeah, I'm
because it wasn't answered. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because the thing is, like, Wolf in this next section responds directly to that reason that I just raised there of living in accordance with the facts. But my question, just reiterating Jordan's question, what other reasons would there be? Because the thing is, like, she doesn't respond to other reasons necessarily. So, like, Jordan asked whether it was just a bonus. So for you, it seems like it's just a bonus in the sense that.
Well, I don't know you mean by bonus then.
Well, no, because what I mean by bonus is you would rather live in accordance with the facts. Yeah. So, but that's not the reason, right? It wasn't the reason that convinced you that the objective attitude was a superior attitude to take than the reactive attitude. So
because last episode you didn't know that was, like you said, even yourself, like, I hadn't considered it, you hadn't considered it either. So are the reasons, like, so okay, if you still thought that same thing without this reason, it seems like that would be by definition a bonus reason, though, right? That's what we're kind of trying to get at.
Honestly, I think there may have been some of that living in accordance with the fact driving my arguments in the previous episode.
Sure, but are there any other chief reasons then? Like, because the thing is, I did get that sense from you actually last time we had talked.
It's very clarifying.
That living in accordance with the facts was a reason, but is it the reason? Do you have other reasons?
Well, I think in general there would be like positive consequences with taking the objective attitude, but I'm not sure that, like, as we discussed, like, they're not necessarily present. I do think living in accordance with the fact is kind of like the root. If that makes sense. I'm not 100% sure on this, honestly.
I just
now I have another question. Yeah.
Because you said there might be benefits, but they might also not be present.
I don't know what that means.
So because the thing is, like, we had like read like in the previous paper that something like maybe a reactive attitude like shame, right?
Sure.
I mean, like, so when you almost remove yourself from how you view yourself, in a sense of, like, you don't think you deserve shame or deserve humiliation when you would take the objective attitude.
Sure.
So there is sort of like almost like a distancing effect there, right? But do you think that also applies to like other interpersonal relationship reactive attitudes, where it's like if you kind of just step back from the feeling of shame and just kind of view yourself objectively, in that you are ultimately not the cause or the source, or your behavior wasn't agentic.
Yeah.
Do you think that when you apply that to other people, maybe that could be harmful in some areas, but helpful in others?
I think I do take that. Of course, in all these instances, I think it would be, the living with accordance with the facts would be kind of in like the con, as like if you're not doing that. But like in raw practical terms in the world we live in, like as I illustrated kind of with the dying woman case, like there could be negative consequences to doing that. I can give you an example of that.
You mean from your perspective, like viewing the dying woman, like you would just be like emotionally removed in a sense? Is that what you're saying?
Oh no,
because this is your attitude we're talking about here. This is like the way you perceive the world and the way you perceive others.
Yeah, I mean, I think there would be possible negative and positive consequences for me taking the objective attitude.
What are the negatives? I'm curious.
I mean, this is like, we're talking about like practical reasons. So consequential is like utilitarian reasons.
Like what?
Let's give like just a hyperbolic example. I say like I feel like I want to take the objective attitude, like kind of like a agreeing with Sommers, like I'll try to take the objective attitude more frequently, right? And no one talks to me ever again, right? All my friends cut me out. That would be like an example where.
Wait, but to be fair, isn't that betraying your view that?
But also that's actually like kind of moving away from what we're talking about.
Yeah,
that's actually a behavioral manifestation of that.
Yeah.
We're saying in this case that the behavior is actually the same, but just imagine like, okay, I can choose a hyperbolic example. Like,
yeah, please.
Like say you were at like, the bedside of your dying father.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
what is the relationship? How does that change when you view him as a non-agentic being at that point versus, loving your father rather than, in caring for your father versus, I guess caring is the wrong word in this case because that could be viewed in either sense. But yeah, but just like, love and admiration and respect. And so like, how would that change versus viewing him more as just a highly complex robot that you enjoyed throughout your life and that you did love, but you loved that he was there, but less so that you loved him.
I don't know if I agree with like the framing of like the lesser, because to me, like, I mean, you're saying even like the behavior could be exactly the same. So like from my perspective, like there might not be like a real lessness in like my reaction. I don't know. You guys seem a little skeptical.
Giffin, but you just said that there are downsides, and then when someone tries to give a hyperbolic example of a downside, you say, "Well, it's not really a downside." So then, can you give us one? It's not a behavior. Give us an attitudinal downside then, because you just said there are some.
Well, I guess I was thinking about. I guess I wasn't necessarily clarifying between like the behaviors and the attitudes, because like when we're talking about the attitudes and the behaviors, well, we're talking about examples where like behavior can be exactly the same between taking both attitudes. It's hard for me to like clarify where I can find a negative. It's because we just like framed it as like, well, the behaviors could be exactly the same.
Well, yeah, but you could go ahead, Brian.
So wait, hold on a second. So you don't think then that the attitudinal there are difficulties? Wait, hold on a second. Yeah, I think I'm a bit lost.
Well, that's Giffin. I think Giffin's being a little bit inconsistent here, which like I think that's why you're lost, Brian, is because like Giffin, we're saying we're just trying to ask you like we should move on, but like this is it's an important point to like just get clear on.
Before we dive into the next part, because the next part is going to be kind of a direct response to this conversation.
Yeah. So Giffin, you're saying you admit, and unless you're going to change your mind and say, okay, now there aren't any attitudinal, but we got to get clear on that. So you're saying initially that there might be attitudinal downsides to taking the objective attitude, even in cases in which the behavior is the same. Okay, so let's look at Adam's example of your dying father. Your behavior towards him.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure that I meant to state that previously. That if my like framing was like taking like an attitude might manifest differently.
Of course,
but if we're equalizing like the behaviors, I'm not sure really what's lost. And I think I might have made a mistake previously in my
so now we're changing,
which I apologize for.
Okay, so now we're changing.
Again, this is something that like I'm really exploring kind of actively at like through reading the papers. But
so now so the current claim is that there's no loss from your perspective in adopting the objective attitude in its totality.
If the behavior is the same.
Sure.
That was like the key thing, and I was inappropriately not linking them, and I apologize. But Brian, do you have a question for me?
Yes. And follow-up question, if you say there is no loss, do you think there's a change?
I think there would be a change. Yeah, I mean, definitionally.
Spell it out.
What would the change look like?
Yeah.
Well, when you're asking me what the change would look like, that seems more almost like a behavioral kind of question.
No.
It's hard to describe.
Like, how do you feel? How do you feel?
How
like
would
in one scenario, you kind of feel like it's how you would feel now. The love and admiration while your father's dying. And the other, like for me, I'm thinking that might be like I might just be like, oh my gosh, this specimen before me, I've
or like, how can I help him die or something? Like what do I need to say to him in order for his last minutes to be good? Yeah,
but there's also just like yes, but I know that these only last so often. Death is happening. I don't know. I say these.
Well, these all sound like behavior
objects.
Well,
this is the inner monologue.
I actually want to go a different direction on this.
Okay, go for it.
I think this is the most challenging case for Giffin.
No. But what about this one though? So this is actually a negative reactive attitude here, but I want to know whether I noticed the stark difference in the two here.
Sure.
So we're still going to go with the dying father example though.
Okay.
What if he dies and there's a funeral that's held?
Okay.
But then you totally forgot about it. For some reason that morning, you woke up, played video games, and play video games through your own father's funeral.
Okay. Hyperbolic example. It's
a hyperbolic example. For some reason, it had just slipped your mind. Do you think that losing the feeling of shame and just adopting just sort of like this objective view of yourself, do you notice that stark difference between the two? Where it's you in one case you feel you deserve every ounce of shame for what you've done. Well, on the other hand, you recognize you don't deserve any shame, in fact, because you're not causa sui. It's a shame that you happen to miss it, but otherwise you don't deserve these strong reactive attitudes. Do you notice the strong difference between those two attitudes one could take about themselves?
I don't know. Here's the thing. Like, you say I wouldn't deserve shame, but I would feel like that I would not deserve the deep sense.
That's the difference. Yes, that Giffin. You can't have this both ways here. You keep saying that they're different and that one might be better than the other, and then every example we give, you say there's actually no difference between the two attitudes, and then you just spelled out a difference.
What difference did I just spell out?
You said I actually would feel like I did deserve.
Well, I said not in a deep sense. That's the difference.
But I would still
feel like in a shallow sense.
Would that be really crossing your mind at that point, though? That just you feel this immense shame, and then a thought pops in your head that, in fact, I really don't deserve to feel.
Well, why would it necessarily have the thought pop into my head like that?
Because you're taking the objective attitude.
Yes, that's the whole difference.
And that's the thing. The objective attitude and everything.
I thought we agreed that it wasn't necessary for the objective attitude to be taken for it to require cognitive load. Wait, what?
Can you clarify that one?
Well, we're regressing, I think, on this.
We don't have to discuss it if you want to just move forward.
But can you see a little bit the difference there between because you mentioning cognitive load there, the idea is that you in fact would be introducing that thought process and that attitude into that situation where it's like, okay, you are realizing that in a deep sense you really don't deserve to feel shame. Even though this might have been a terrible thing that happened, it's not a terrible thing that you did. In the sense that you didn't deserve.
It would still be a thing that I did.
I knew you were going to seize on that. I knew it. I knew you were going to seize onto that phrasing there, because the thing is, it still was a terrible thing that you did. Mm-hmm. But do you think in that moment that introducing the idea that you don't deserve it, the feeling of shame in any sort of deep sense, would somehow change that experience? Would it change the experience?
Well, you're giving me an example where in one instance I kind of don't reflect at all, and in one instance I kind of force myself to, right? So there's a clear difference there. What I'm saying is, I don't know if it's a necessity that taking the objective attitude would require me to kind of do that, second pass through what I'm about to do and feel. And I would compare this.
Okay, pretend it didn't then. Pretend you actually just naturally embody the objective attitude.
Sure.
What's the difference then? You're claiming there's a difference inherently and explicitly, actually. So, like, but all we're asking for so we can move forward is, under your perspective, what is the difference between taking those two views of yourself in this hyperbolic scenario?
I honestly am just having trouble describing this without like using the behavioral framing.
That seems extremely strange.
So like you couldn't go through like what you would be thinking in this
like
time?
thinking.
Like,
I can do that. But
okay.
Last time I tried to, I feel like I accidentally went into the behavioral. I would feel like a deep sense of loss. I would feel.
In which case is this?
This is the example Adam gave.
No. But are you describing
your father's funeral?
Yeah, I am fully embodying the objective attitude without any cognitive load associated with it. I would feel loss, kind of regret. I would feel a sense of shame just without having to, without a sense of shame without any agency associated with it. A feeling that I ought be.
Let's pause there on that exact sentence, though. What does it mean to feel a sense of shame without actually feeling you deserve any sort of the directed, almost like reproach?
I mean, this is very, very difficult to describe. But I guess it would feel like I would deserve. I mean, this is laying it out like this sounds kind of like robotic, but it would feel like a sense like I would deserve kind of a like some sort of consequential reprimanding.
But why would you though? I mean, if you were adopting the objective attitude, then you fully recognize that you don't deserve anything.
Well, it deserves in a deep sense, as a kind of local causal aid. I don't want to use the word agent, but as the local cause of shame and embarrassment. It would
in almost sense that you're viewing shame in this case is you recognize that you deserve some reprisals from others in the community for your behavior, and it's expected.
And even by myself.
But why? Why from yourself?
Well, I mean, in one sense, it's because, I would recognize that I wasn't behaving in accordance with, what I thought I ought to, right? I think it would be inappropriate for someone to sleep in and miss their father's funeral.
Yeah, but it was outside of your control, though.
This is going to be very interesting to hear the juxtaposition with what the reactive attitude is at this point. I can't wait to hear that. Okay, now paint me the picture, Giffin.
Sure.
I don't know what on earth you're going to say now. If you viewed yourself with the reactive attitude, how would you be thinking right now in this scenario?
I mean, are we still keeping this sense that the behaviors are identical?
Sure. Just a change.
That makes it super difficult.
But you're claiming there's a difference, so you got to be able to spell it out.
Well, the difference. Well, that's true.
Do we want to?
I guess
don't revisit.
No, we just can't let this get away.
I guess it would.
This is it right now.
Yeah. So this is a situation. Let's just outline it again, where the two.
No, let's not. Let's just because we know the scenario. Giffin, it's okay. Either admit that you don't actually know what it would look like, but let's not circle the wagons for an eighth time.
Well, I guess I was going to just bring up the Sommers, Sommers. Biblical example,
but that's all. But that was all about. I don't know. You have to do that to explain just how you would feel differently.
I mean, I thought it would help clarify, but maybe not. I mean, clearly, I have some confusion, so we can move on if you'd like.
I think we should move on, as Brian said at this point. Because I think the next part of the paper is super, super interesting. I really want to dive into this. This is
it's super
I don't
interesting.
know how I feel about it.
No, I don't either. But just my whole point, I wasn't trying to be a gotcha there, Giffin. But the problem from my perspective is like in this conversation with the four of us, like I don't really know honestly how you're viewing the objective attitude, because I'm not sure that like if I'm asking you for the difference and you can't spell it out to me, that's like a real, like I don't know exactly what you're saying at that point. And you didn't really even.
It was difficult because I don't know that I had previously like differentiated so strongly between the behavioral and like the attitudinal. And like when you're trying to give like when I'm trying to outline like concrete examples that like in a world where the behaviors are the same, it's kind of difficult. Like I'm not sure if I know the definite like the difference between those two fully. Which was
it's the fact that like
if my thoughts are like the only difference, like in like the world we're talking about, like this includes like brain chemistry and stuff, like are my thoughts being different kind of a manifestation of the behavioral, or
we need not bring brain chemistry into this.
No, but Giffin on this point though, I think we do actually need to make like a correction in terms of like your conception of this a little bit, because the thing is, your introduction of shame in the objective attitude doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it makes sense to Jordan either. Like the thing is like when you said that you would feel some sense of shame, but only in a shallower sense. Like it wouldn't. You would recognize that ultimately you are not responsible for this behavior, but you would feel something.
Okay. Can I reframe this a little bit?
You may, but I want you to concede that point there, that is a reactive attitude in how you view yourself. Like the idea of shame is that you do deserve kind of this self-reproach in a sense.
Like I should have done I shouldn't have done. It's like a real. And the objective attitude is actually mutually exclusive with feeling that way. No, it's just, this is this thing that this series of events of which I was part of. It's unfortunate that occurred. That's not shame.
Okay.
Do you see the difference there on that one?
Kind of, but maybe not fully.
But do you understand
deliberately difficult?
No, I'm not being intentionally difficult.
But do you see why we would exclude shame from the objective attitude?
Well, I mean, I didn't know that my conception wasn't shame. Like what I described seemed to be in accordance with the idea of shame, just not the kind of shame that would, require like agency, like the deep shame.
It seemed like your conception of shame was like
you can still, I could still like have a conception of shame where like I deserve like punishment for myself and my community because like I was acting in such a way that like was bringing negative consequence. Right?
Should a machine punish itself though if it like malfunctions?
I mean, if we want behavior to change, yeah.
Why? Well, but no, but that doesn't make any sense. That's only if you define the machine as requiring punishment to change. But if you're taking the objective that doesn't seem, that is for sure, that could even be possible, but it's for sure not necessary. If you actually do embody the objective attitude, why would you need punishment to change? That in itself makes no sense. If you actually embody the objective attitude with respect to yourself, you would recognize, this is an unfortunate thing that occurred. Where's the therefore I need punishment so that I will learn?
Well,
Jordan, I think you actually missed it, Jordan, a little bit on that one, because I think the idea though is that didn't Giffin just justify the reactive attitude based on consequences?
Like, no, I think that's a different point.
No, but like the idea that like it's just like we can justify it through the consequences that it will have in on ourselves, on maybe possibly like if one were to feel shame, it acts as some sort of deterrent for future behavior like that. So
no, you're exactly right. But then he went on to say that you can have all of that without taking the reactive attitudes, aka only taking the objective attitude. So I'm at this point like, what the hell is he referring to as objective attitude at this point?
Well, I mean,
that's my question.
I can embody the objective attitude and have made a miscalculation about behavior, or if that makes sense.
No, yes, but you're factoring into your own definition, like your own miscalculations. That doesn't make any sense. Like,
No, but given your example with the machine, though, like the idea, like I asked, like, could a machine, like, why would a machine punish itself? And you say, well, okay, well, if it will then
inform
act as
future
like,
behavior.
Exactly. So the idea is that like shame in this sense, like kind of a reactive desert-based attitude, would then possibly, as a consequence of that, result in behavior that, maybe it was self-corrective in a sense. Better. So wouldn't that be the reactive attitude?
Well, what I described as like kind of a recognition of like a need to change for the future without like any conception of agency, does that not ring as shame, or is that like nothing to you? Like, I'm just not sure how you viewed that.
I don't think honestly, I have difficulty imagining how the two thoughts existing in the head could be possible. Like the one where you're consciously holding the thought that you are non-agentic, that this behavior, you are not responsible for this behavior, and that you also feel shame for this behavior. I don't see how the two thoughts could be held in the head, in your head at the same time.
Maybe this can help clarify. You seem to be like sticking with the point about the like two thoughts in the head at the same time.
Yes, I think they're contradictory.
Right. Well, it doesn't need to be I don't know that there needs to be that conscious thought there. Because to me, like the difference, and this is like one of the definitional differences that we had brought up, but to me, Sommers, good Lord, was making the point that, the difference between the objective and the reactive attitudes, like definitionally, is that to take the reactive attitude is to like view the, people as agents, right? That's what the definition.
But also deserving agents in the sense that, like with shame, you think you deserve the self-reproach. And then the objective attitude is that you ultimately don't deserve this self-reproach.
Well, to me, those definitions are like tied together. Like they seem to be synonymous. Like the deserving can only exist if you're an agent in a,
I'm happy with that.
Yeah, fine.
Deterministic
I'm happy
way.
with that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So that is the only definitional difference between the two, right? In my mind. Okay. In that framing, there's nothing else like tied to it specifically, but there are some like correlating, and in the human world that we live in, a lot of correlating factors, right? And this is where I'm going to bring up like the religious example from Sommers, like the Joshua, who was like religious, but then slowly morphed into like an atheist. The difference that is like I thought was a really good analogy to what I was imagining in like this difference between like the objective and the reactive attitudes, because it is not definitional that it requires like the objective attitude requires a higher mental load. And thus, like in your example where you said that there were two thoughts existing simultaneously, that doesn't really need to be the case. If you can reframe it a little bit, it is not necessarily like the inclusion of a thought about non-agency. It can be the lack of a like conceptualization of agency.
Okay, but
right?
But
did that make sense? Am I like
yes? It makes sense that
okay.
You don't need to like necessarily have that like that
right.
thought per se in your head.
Right.
But the idea is that you're going to act on default, or by default, that you don't have agency.
Right.
If that's your default, then how could you have shame? Like why would that directed self-reproach?
Well, I'm still a human, and there are like consequences to that. Like the reproach.
Yeah,
the reproach can be.
Yeah, I think we're talking past each other.
That's also just to clarify that the sixth section of that paper, the Joshua example, has nothing to do with the cognitive load. That's not the point that Sommers was making in that section. It's the point of the psychological possibility about how someone can shift over time. And
right.
But that.
Well, I thought that a cognitive load thing was relevant because you can draw an analogy between someone who is like, was pre-programmed to understand like God with respect to like everything. The transition would require mental load, but eventually he would unthinkingly do it. So I was tying that in. I understand that wasn't necessarily exactly the framing that Sommers was using it in, but I thought it was relevant.
Giffin, where does that L come from?
The what?
Sommers.
Sommers.
I'm gonna be very upset if we don't actually get to what I think I would like to understand as the most.
Let's do this.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, so all right, so Adam, this was the section that you were just really just chomping at the bit to get at. So
absolutely,
yeah.
I'm gonna share the screen for this one.
Yeah. Do you want to? So this is 394. So this is saying. So we got to circle back around because that was a long digression. That. So she's saying that even if determinism is true, and even if this implies, as a matter of metaphysical fact, that we are not free and responsible beings, this, doesn't give us any reason to regard ourselves as unfree or unresponsible beings. And now she's going to explain why. And well, I guess she actually clarifies, if we have no reason at all to abandon these practices, then we have nothing we need to override, no value we need to contradict in choosing to keep those attitudes. Our retention to the reactive attitudes need not be viewed as a choice between the lesser of two evils. Okay, now that she just made like a very ambitious claim, and now she's going to justify that.
And I think we should skip the case of the addict, because I think for time, it actually makes more sense to go to the case of the robot.
I agree, because just to explain this, this is what I took her to be doing, Adam, is she's doing a kind of progression where there appears to be distinctions, but there actually aren't any. It's very much a paraboom 4 case, but almost in reverse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's like she kind of gets to the heart of it with the robot case. You know what I mean? So it's like, the addict kind of eases you into the argument.
Let me just say really quickly, because I do think she brings up like a little bit of a difference. So her whole point with the addict is that if the addict is addicted to a drug, he's going to take it regardless of whether he wants to or not, because he's addicted. But if he actually like endorses his taking of the drug, then he's proclaiming himself a free and responsible being and saying, yes, I want to take this drug. And if he doesn't want to take the drug, he's proclaiming himself an unfree and unresponsible actor, saying, look, I actually don't even want to take this, and yet I do take it.
Brian, does that make sense to you? This is this is a Frankfurt paper that we read here.
Unfortunately, you also missed.
This is like some like my favorite logic that we've done so far in moral responsibility, where it's like
I love that paper
where it's just like one's second order volitions, in the sense that like those actually, if one were a free being, one would behave in a way that is, concordant with
perfectly
one's second order volitions. However, if one's behavior isn't aligned with one's second order volitions, then one actually is almost like an unwilling addict in a sense, and isn't morally responsible for that behavior. Obviously, this is all in a shallow sense, but isn't morally responsible for that behavior because they would have done otherwise had they been a free and agentic being. So it's
so good.
I love that logic.
Yeah,
it's so good.
It's my favorite paper that we've
done. So Wolf brings that up, and then she contrasts it with the case of the robot. So I mean, Adam, feel free to jump in here, but she says like, so let's imagine a robot that has been completely programmed. Okay, so it would, but she goes on to say, okay, but look, this takes a human form. There's no kind of there's no valley, the
uncanny valley.
Yeah, there's no uncanny valley. It doesn't look weird. If no one ever told you this was a robot, you would never know.
Perfect android, less a robot.
So the robot wouldn't know either.
Exactly. That actually very important point.
Yeah.
So she says that let's assume that the robot's programming is not of any normal or familiar kind. So it's actually the case that this robot is programmed on a day-to-day, or rather moment-by-moment basis. So it's getting its programming as it's executing it. It's just a stream of essentially consciousness. I mean, I'm jumping the gun, but this is just how we are. Like, what we're going to do arises when in fact we do it. And she's saying, okay, the robot is like this too. So she says, second paragraph 396. In light of the nature of the robot's programming, I believe that the only way of living in accordance with the facts would be by regarding this robot solely with the objective attitude. That is, I believe that the robot is not a free and responsible being in whatever sense of free and responsible the objects of our reactive attitudes are ordinarily assumed to be. Were we to be purely rational, we would allow ourselves to feel some emotions towards the robot, but we would not feel those emotions or sentiments constitutive of our reactive attitudes. Okay, and then continuing, she goes on to talk about, if it's led into our society, we could, punish it, we could reward it, we could treat it with respect as we would any other human. And so she says, next page 397, let's now assume that after years of thinking himself to be like other human beings, the robot comes to believe that he is completely programmed, really comes to know that he is completely programmed. If at this point we were to adopt the robot's interests as our own, would it be rational for us to urge to the programmer, presumably, that the robot take the objective attitude towards himself? So this is just like a thrilling turn in the paper, actually. It's worth just continuing to read, honestly. Yeah. By this question, I mean to approach the question: would it be rational for the robot to adopt the objective attitude towards himself as closely as my standards of conceptual coherence allow? I am not sure that we can make sense of the question, what would it be rational for the robot to do? Because the answer it's going to do, it just depends on what the programmer is going to do. But on the robot's behalf, we might ask, what is it rational to do? How should he view himself in the objective attitude? Okay, so here's her answer. So she says, well, I can imagine some situations in which it might be. If, for example, the robot were an individual unusually tormented by an awareness of his limitations, the belief that he was not responsible for the meagerness of his abilities might be a source of some comfort to him. Or if the members of the robot's community did take the purely rational attitude towards the robot's own adoption of the purely objective attitude towards himself might allow him to take this treatment less personally. I'll skip that aside. Insofar as we argue that the robot should adopt or try to adopt the objective attitude towards himself for reasons such as these, however, we are not arguing for the adoption of this attitude simply on the grounds that the attitude is appropriate. That is, we are not arguing that the robot should take this attitude simply because of his and our value in living in accordance with the facts. Our reasons for urging that the robot should take the objective attitude are rather utilitarian ones. His life will be less painful if he takes the objective attitude towards himself. Okay, let's pause. Okay, so far this checks out to me, right? Like I take it that she's just saying one can view himself in the objective attitude if it is a utilitarian, aka consequentialist good. Like if it's this was, just to go back, this was one of the most incisive parts of the Sommers paper. Like he talks about, like you just stay up all night, kind of like wringing your hands over guilt and like you should have done differently. Okay, but I mean, at a certain point, like, it's not actually useful sometimes to do that. Like you couldn't have done differently. It really sucks that this happened, but sometimes you should take the objective attitude. Just like, look, okay, I can't change the past, but like, just what's the right thing to do moving forward? Okay, so far what she's saying checks out to me. Sure. Okay, no quibble so far.
That's exactly how I interpreted that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay, nice. Yeah. Furthermore, if the robot were programmed to take this attitude, he would not really be taking an attitude that would be in accordance with the facts. Okay, this is the change. This is where it just gets crazy.
How many times did you guys read this paragraph?
Oh, I read this paragraph so many times.
I went through this one because I'm like, what is she saying? Right?
When I read this paper the first time, I did not get the depth of this point at first. I had to reread it. Okay. So let's just read this here. Furthermore, if the robot were programmed to take this attitude, he would not really be taking an attitude that would be in accordance with the facts. In believing that the reactive attitudes towards himself are inappropriate, he would not be accepting all the implications of the fact that he is programmed. He would not be denying his freedom and responsibility completely. For the robot, in taking an objective attitude of himself, necessarily leaves a part of himself out of this view. Specifically, he leaves out the part of himself which is taking the objective attitude. The robot perhaps takes comfort in the fact that he, as it were, his self, is not responsible for his meager abilities, or the robot takes comfort in thinking that he is not responsible for the fact that he is merely a robot. But the robot's alienation from his abilities on the one hand, or from his robotness on the other, presupposes a self from whom these things are alienated, a self whose fault these things are not. And of course, in this example, the robot self is itself just the result of his programming. Okay, to the extent...
Here's the sentence right here that's absolutely wonderful.
I have this highlighted. To the extent that being programmed justifies a denial of responsibility for any feature of the robot's existence, it justifies, indeed demands, a denial of responsibility for every feature of his existence, including in particular his denial of responsibility for every other feature. Okay, let's unpack that paragraph.
Yeah.
Let's go bottom to top.
Well, yeah, especially like the final one here.
Yes,
like, okay,
yes.
So let's go through that again. So
yes.
To the extent that being programmed justifies a denial of responsibility for any feature of the robot's existence.
It does. Okay, so every feature. This is a conditional claim, right? So she's saying if being programmed denies your responsibility for at least any feature of your existence, it denies it for every feature. That seems to be logically coherent to me. I put a check next to that.
Yes. Okay. So it justifies, indeed demands, denial of responsibility for every feature for his existence.
Yes.
Including his own denial of responsibility
yes.
for every other feature.
Yes.
So that's kind of like the punchline right there.
Yes.
Is that, what she's trying to sort of bring up here is that even if one, this is kind of jumping the gun just a little bit here, but the idea that she's trying to bring up here is that, okay, so even if you take an have an attitudinal shift, you're sort of tipping your hat at the idea that you're acting in an agentic manner. In that sense, you view yourself agentically when you decide to take an attitudinal shift. To take
the objective stance. Yeah.
Yes.
She's saying that is deeply inconsistent with the thesis of the objective stance. Yes. So the act of taking it nullifies the stance itself.
Yes.
First of all, crazy point there. And I mean crazy in a wonderful sense. That is so. That is just so original and just so interesting. I don't even care what we end up. I don't even know what I fully think of that yet. But that is a genius move on her part.
Yeah, it's crazy interesting. Because I was just sitting on my couch before we did this, and I was just kind of observing, just kind of switching between different attitudes.
I know.
And just the agentic feeling that you have and regard yourself having as you make that switch. You don't view yourself as a non-agentic being as you change your attitude. On how you view human behavior. It's
what is interesting? I wasn't planning on doing this. I think I just betrayed her very point. When I was kind of giving I was tipping my hat to Sommers, and I said that's a super good point he makes, where he says, oh, you're staying up all night, you're wringing your hands over this terrible mistake you made, you hurt someone so badly, right? And then you actually just realize, why am I doing this? This isn't actually helpful. Look, I actually couldn't have done otherwise. I'm not cause a sui. I couldn't have done otherwise. Why am I going to just punish myself all night with these reactive attitudes? Let me try to just shirk them off and take the objective stance and look, this is a terrible thing that happened. Let's see how I can just better the situation moving forward. it seems like there is intrinsic in that I seem to betray a very agentic stance. Let's not take these reactive attitudes. Let's instead actually just take the objective attitude.
Yeah. And the thing is, like Giffin, think about it this way. I want to ask Giffin this question real fast. So it's like I know Giffin before hopping on the previous podcast was like, actually, after reading this paper, I'm interested in attempting to take the objective stance here, or the objective attitude. Thinking back on that, Giffin, did you find that to be almost like an agentic experience where you had decided before the podcast to maybe adopt this objective attitude? Did you kind of thinking back on that critically of yourself, did you find that to be almost as though you treated it like a decision, like that was a decision that you made? Did you view yourself in that light?
I think it did feel like a decision that I made. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, what are the implications there? Okay, Giffin, if you just said that, then do you buy her? I think you did actually. You previously, I think you either nodded or unmuted real quick and said yes. You said you just buy that to the extent that any feature is just unjustified. Every feature is, including the denial of every other feature, or the denial of responsibility. So how do you see that intersecting with your other views?
I'm not sure. This would be a good thing to kind of discuss if there's like a contradiction there. I kind of see her point. Well, I guess first I did agree with like what she was conceptualizing about like the robot. Was that not a good thing to say?
I just don't get what are you saying? What's the point? Did you cut out?
No, I'm here.
Can we actually read her conclusion real fast before we kind of dive into this? Because not the entire conclusion, obviously, but just the part where she kind of reiterates this point, because I thought she put it even better when she was like summarizing her argument.
All right, repeat the phrase.
Yeah, let me find that real fast here.
Well, so the point that Wolf is making here is that in taking the objective attitude, which I'm curious if you I just want to hear your reactions to this. There's a bit of reticence, I think, about this point. If you're taking the objective attitude and that act of taking it is an agentic one, but the objective attitude in its totality would deny that you could take responsibility for anything, or AKA feel as though you were an agent in doing anything. Doesn't that percolate back then? And the very act of taking that stance seems to be in conflict with that stance. If taking the objective attitude is denying responsibility for all of your features, yet you have to feel as though you're going to take the objective stance, do you see that as a contradiction?
I'm not sure. To be frank.
Can I read this wonderful paragraph here? So sorry, I know you were having a little discussion there, but I think this will just further clarify the issue, because I think she puts it wonderfully here. So she said, we first considered the suggestion that the recognition that as a matter of metaphysical fact, we were not free or responsible beings. Would give us a reason to regard ourselves as unresponsible beings. It would give us a reason, that is, to replace our present reactive attitudes with the objective attitude toward ourselves and each other. But we saw that this change would fail to achieve its purpose. It would not satisfy the desire to live in accordance with the facts. For it is only rational to take some particular attitude toward ourselves in the context of the belief that we are, at least in our capacity as attitude takers, free and responsible beings. Therefore, we would be no less irrational if we chose to take the objective attitude than if we chose to take the other alternative.
Dude, that is so original.
like the idea that you could just, adopt a different attitude implies that you're viewing yourself agentically, that as though like you're making that decision.
Yeah, it's almost like, can you choose to take the objective attitude from like a stance of an objective attitude?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Is this something that I'll have to reflect on?
Yeah, no, I
because
so Adam, I've got a few questions for you about this. Okay, so this is like this point just like fills me with excitement because I don't fully know kind of exactly where I stand, okay, let's kind of think this through here. So she's making this point that like taking the objective attitude doesn't really make any sense because you have to take it with respect to yourself. And in the act of taking the objective attitude, you betray the thesis of the objective attitude, essentially. That's her point, as you understand it as well, right? Okay. I can't get over how I don't know why I'm like just kind of like mawkishly like ogling over that, but I just love that cool point.
No, it's great.
It's such a cool point, and I don't even know if I agree with it yet, but it's so cool.
No, I don't. That's why I wanted to hop on this and hash this out, because I have no idea either.
So let's think this through here. So there is, I don't know what I think about this, but here's just a related thought. So phenomenologically or subjectively, it is true that I can really actually fully notice my lack of agency from time to time, right? So if I'm paying attention to just talking right now, I actually don't really kind of know what I'm going to say, where I'm going to stutter, hesitate, misspeak, any of those things, right? It's all a mystery to me. And in the same way, I can kind of notice other actions in that way too. What are more quintessentially intentional actions, right? And you've had that experience too.
Sure.
Okay. That's a subjectively true fact that I have to that has to fit into this picture somehow, because that is just a phenomenologically true for me.
Sure, but I think in this case right here, we almost have to imagine ourselves like in like the philosophy discourse, looking at two different attitudes that we could potentially take, right? Like there's like these constant debates going on, like should we take the reactive, should we take the objective?
Well,
it's like
you beat me to the punch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like okay, well, you deciding on one, like it's an agentic experience. So
what I'm thinking, the exact same thought process we were going towards there. So if because there seems to be, it seems to be that can be subjectively true, and yet that can map onto me both taking the reactive attitudes towards myself and the objective. So it's not enough, in other words, right? Like the can
you almost like fall into the objective attitude in the sense there's, well, I mean, like in the sense that like we're talking about like always taking, right?
Oh no.
So like it would be almost like it would be like a cognitive decision. Like this would be something like you're aware of taking this attitude. Could that ever be a non-agentic experience? Like I just like actively.
Maybe we can compare this to a different example that's like kind of similar. Like, can you even like to decide to take the bus non-agentically? I don't know if that's helpful for comparison, but it seems like it might be.
Well, so it's clear that you can kind of, so subjectively, I think it's obvious that you can find yourself taking the bus. You can kind of like, you can notice the fact that you deciding to take the bus comes out of nowhere, but you are still deciding to take the bus in some sense.
Will we consider that an agentic experience then? Because I'm genuinely not sure how you guys are like wrapping your heads around this. Because to me, I might be useful to like compare like the bus example to the, objective attitude taking. Just to clarify if it's conceivable in the first place.
I'm thinking though that like my own raising of that point is slightly, it's related, but it's not fully orthogonal, but it's on a tilt to this point because I take her point to be an extremely practical one, right? Like she's saying in life, we're either going to take the objective stance or the reactive stance. And if we are defaulting, I think as all humans do, like I think someone's just lying if they say they don't naturally default to the reactive stance. Like I can
depending on the situation, of course. Like,
of course, I was saying so they never.
Yeah. So I think the idea is that you default somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So any circumstance you're going to default somewhere, but then we're talking about taking the objective attitude,
of course,
all the time. So to override that default is almost like an agentic experience at that point where you're making a decision to adopt the objective attitude.
And I think even her point can be a temporal one where if you get yourself to the point where you're like a Buddhist monk who's reached enlightenment and you just actually witness everything in that non-agentic sense, Wolf might respond, I would assume, as saying, okay, but at some point you chose to undertake that endeavor, right? So even someone, and this is a slightly different thing than viewing yourself as that, but someone who accomplishes Sommers' aim and embodies the objective attitude in their totality, okay, but at some point you had to make the decision to do that. That is viewing yourself under the lens or the guise of responsibility. That is conflicting with the objective stance. So it's a temporal contradiction at that point for Wolf, but nonetheless a contradiction, right? So so you couldn't get out of it by doing that either. So taking the objective stance, here's another question. Is her point against the objective attitude only one that is relevant in its totality? Because we got to remember, like, that is the scope of this paper and the previous one. So it's about a totality claim. That her claim seems to be less poignant if you are looking at it as sometimes it is justifiable to stay in reactivity and sometimes it is justifiable or obligatory to take the objective stance. Then her point is like, okay, sure, but that's just you're trying to take a moral decision or not, or you could be immorally taking the objective stance, this seems to be
and it's all about, like, in this sense, it's taking the reactive or objective stance with respect to yourself.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, so and like, I think she acknowledges that there are cases where we take the objective stance towards others.
Sure.
And she doesn't actually go into any detail, like, your thoughts on this, where one should and shouldn't. And
sure. Do you think I'm right though? Where her thesis is really exclusively aimed at the person who says, I can take the objective attitude totally.
Oh yeah. That's how I read this paper. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, even like, obviously that was her intention, but I think logically it really doesn't intersect as much with someone who's doing it from time to time.
Yeah, not at all.
Okay.
I wouldn't say not. I would say not.
No, I would say not at all. I think that it is actually really narrowly aimed at this. She's pointing out the impossibility. Logically, this is not a psychological claim, but like logically, it is incoherent, even temporally, to take the objective stance without admitting that you have to act under the guise that conflicts with it to do that.
Yeah, like let me read that one little sentence again, because I think it's like the kicker is really about the attitude toward ourselves. Let me read that one again there.
Okay.
For it is only rational to take some particular attitude toward ourselves in the context of the belief that we are, at least in our capacity as attitude takers, free and responsible beings.
Hmm.
So if we're going to take an attitude toward ourselves, implicit in that is that we are capable of taking attitudes as free and responsible beings. Like if you adopt an attitude towards yourself, one that you hold, but you're kind of admitting that you're someone that can hold attitudes kind of freely and responsibly. If is
that the case?
Someone typing? Sorry, continue.
Okay, Giffin, go ahead.
I was just wondering if that's necessarily the case. I'm not sure if that feels as intuitive to me as it does to you guys.
I understand like some like the issues with it in the sense that like, do you think that one could take an attitude toward oneself, like the objective attitude, if one didn't think they were capable of taking attitudes freely?
Well, we have attitudes towards other people that we may not ultimately recognize as being free and responsible beings.
Can you repeat
Sure.
I missed the question. Can you repeat? I was making a note.
Yeah. The question is like,
I'm sorry. Giffin's original question, not yours. Sorry.
Okay, Giffin, go ahead.
Oh, I was just asking what Adam had said about the self view, like whether it's you can, Adam, correct me if I'm like getting the wording slightly off, but it's like if you're taking the self view, is it like possible to take that an attitude towards yourself without recognizing that you're a free and responsible being? Does that sound about right, Adam?
Well, I don't think it has to do with recognizing, but she's saying implicit in taking an attitude, like because we all actually, you included, betrayed this implicitly when we all kind of were like, because we were talking about it before we even got to this point, and we were like, okay, but I was talking about the hand ringing on the bed. Let me just take this attitude with respect to myself. It's not that you have to have this. It's not that you have to have this theoretical endorsement of I will act as if I'm an agent and take this. It's that implicit in that act is the view of yourself as acting under the guise of responsibility. It's not that it has to be like implicitly endorsed by you. I take it is Wolf's point. It's a logical claim.
Also, yeah, exactly, because it's focus on the rationality of it. I think like that word is really important in this case, that it's only rational to adopt some attitude toward ourselves, if we think that we're capable of adopting attitudes freely.
What a cool point.
Like, do you like is it irrational to do otherwise? Like, what do you think? Or Brian or anyone?
That's a thinker.
That's it?
I mean, I'm not really following right now. Say that again.
So the idea that you would adopt some attitude towards yourself, right?
Yeah, it's contradictory. Yeah.
It's only rational to adopt some attitude about yourself if you think that you're capable of taking attitudes freely.
Right.
Dude, I just connected it with
we
the
already
rest.
Discussed that point.
It really sunk into me right now, this point's connection with the rest of the paper. Like, I got it intellectually, but I just really hit home now. Because remember, living in accordance with the facts was supposed to be this massive gravity, this massive pull towards taking the objective attitude. If we want to live in accordance with the facts, damn it, don't you get it? That means taking the objective stance. She's pointing out that there's actually no reason why that's true, because there is an inherent contradiction in taking the objective attitude. Of that contradiction we've been belaboring for 20 minutes at this point. But like that, okay, boom, that doesn't even live in accordance with the facts at that point. So neither attitude does that. Now there's no competing value between the reactive stance, the value of which is that it constitutes our interpersonal relationships, and the value of taking the objective stance in its totality, which is living with the facts because of that contradiction. I like for that's just like the paper just jigsaw locked in for me. What I don't actually give a damn if you think this point is like nonsense or not, but what an amazing structure of a paper. Like what an amazing like dude, it's
a 10 out of 10 paper.
It's a 10 out of 10 paper. I don't even care. You could disagree with every point she makes and it's a 10 out of 10 paper. So and oh no, I lost the additional thing there. Oh shit.
I think but like so like the idea is that like so adopting like the objective attitude towards oneself as though one is a free and responsible being is irrational, and therefore one isn't really living in accordance with the facts at that point. So
wow. And she concludes on page 400, the truth of determinism then gives us no reason at all to replace our present reactive attitudes with the objective attitude. It's just like that is the therefore there. And so I take it that holy shit, actually is her okay, Adam, help me out here. Is her project actually now or at least the grounding extremely similar to everything that I've been saying without knowing that it was like talked about in this paper, where now we actually, we have the value of the reactive attitudes in that they constitute interpersonal life. Interpersonal life is a good thing. Okay, we have that. And we have the option then. Now, this is maybe what I don't know if this might be the only thing I disagree on. I don't know if I do or not. It seems so. Adam, do you think that she would agree with the statement as follows? Determinism does not give us a reason to replace our present attitudes with the objective attitude. That's totally true. However, it does open the door to taking the objective attitude, not in its totality, but in partiality. I think that seems coherent.
But they just wouldn't be on the grounds of living in accordance with reality. I think that's what she's trying to take down in this case right here. Because your examples of when one could take the objective attitude are almost
they're for consequentialist.
Yeah, exactly.
But can I say something? Because you made me think of a really cool point. Okay. They are in accordance with the facts, but in a completely different way. So there's almost two senses of being in accordance with the facts here. The taking the objective stance can be follow me here. Let me follow myself here because I'm just thinking it through. Okay, taking the objective attitude can be consequentially justified, right? It can be consequentially justified because it tends to produce, or let's say it just does in one example, better outcomes. It produces better outcomes, we would assume, because namely the behavioral change that follows from allowing yourself to analyze it like that under the objective stance works better. Working better tends to correlate with actually conforming with reality closer, right? Like I could view someone and look like this traumatic experience that they underwent, or their brain tumor, or their ex, right? Deterministic details about them is forcing them to behave in certain patterns. I'm going to take the objective stance and look at how to deal with that person. So in that, but that's a different, so that's living with,
but this is with respect to yourself.
Of course.
Remember, so that's the big distinction there is like, with respect to oneself when taking attitudes.
Well, but so I'm actually not disagreeing with Wolf here at all, but I think that, that's true with yourself too. Like you could, but it's not in its totality. That's the huge difference here, is I think in its totality, because if I take the objective stance towards myself, it's the same reasoning as with respect to another, right? Like I happen to succumb to, if I do X, then I will helplessly do Y, or at least I have in the past. There's no reason to think I won't in the future. That is living in accordance with the facts insofar as I make the right calculations about myself. But sure, it doesn't succumb to this logical fallacy because I am admitting that I'm sort of taking that stance. And I'm not saying that I take it as totality. So actually it's so the partiality is not in contradiction with it. And living in accordance with the facts can still be valuable, as she goes on later in the paper to actually, discuss why it's valuable in the partiality view. And that's why it actually leads to better consequences sometimes. So it's like totally, it actually totally is congruent.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with all that. So yeah, I just like this paper is crazy. This
paper. So I read this paper, I read it again, and then I reviewed it, and then we discussed it, and it was like each time there was just a cascade of meaning that poured out of it that I did not realize was there the previous time.
Yeah, I mean, like I read it once and didn't really understand the paper.
No.
And then I spent today reading it, and I probably spent like 2.5 hours on this single paper,
rich.
and just making sure I was understanding the points. And when I got to the robot section, I read it a few times, and then it hit, and I was like, oh, I'm like, it's so good.
Dude, yeah. Dude, she pops off like Frankfurt does in his PAP paper.
Yeah,
dude.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't know like what you other guys think about Brian and Giffin, but like does that strike you as a powerful sentence that it's irrational to adopt attitudes toward oneself, and implicit in adopting those is acting agentically?
It doesn't ring as true for me, but that's just a case of I probably need to just read through it fully again to fully conceptualize, because I'm not sure. I don't know. I just don't feel it as intuitively, personally.
I follow her argument and agree on the soundness. It's just there's an emotional part of me. Like I don't want that to be the case, I guess.
Wait. Don't want what to be the case?
That you can't kind of impose this view on yourself because that'd be irrational.
Well, but so be careful here, because I don't think she's saying that you couldn't take the objective view with respect to yourself in specific moments, or even in certain circumstances, or over perhaps even long stretches of time. Because that's totally logically coherent. The thing that is incoherent from her perspective is taking the objective stance in its totality, because the very act of taking the objective stance assumes that you're acting under the guise of agency and responsibility.
Wait, but you can take it after some X period of time?
No.
Okay. Then what was your first point about?
So it's about totality versus partiality, right? So she's saying, okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So over some time, you can take the stance. You can take the objective stance. That was your first point, correct?
Yeah. Like at time 0, you haven't yet taken the objective stance. At time 1, you've taken the objective stance. Right? Like that's just how it has to be. Like any decision is like that.
I mean, that's okay.
Wait, right? Like that.
Sure. Yeah, no. That I
okay.
It seems redundant to me, I guess. Yeah, it's like any decision can be taken over some period of time. Okay.
Well, yeah, but I mean, each step might seem redundant until she links it together.
I was reading into it too much.
Okay. So she's okay. So at time 1, once you've taken the objective attitude with respect to yourself in its totality, that view of yourself entails that you are not responsible for anything about your constitution or what you do. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. However, in order to in branching from time 0 to time 1, you have to take the objective stance, which means acting as if you actually do have agency and responsibility for what you're doing. Like I have to take this stance. Like it's an act that you do.
Right.
That is incompatible with the thesis of the objective attitude in its totality, which is you're not responsible for anything. Because if you're not responsible for anything,
then how could you choose to take the objective
Exactly.
So how isn't that what I said?
Oh,
what was different about what I said?
I wasn't sure because you said I don't want it to be true, but I wasn't, because yeah, so she's not saying that it's incoherent or irrational or logically inconsistent to take the objective stance towards yourself from time to time. But this imaginary person, Sommers, actually, early Sommers, who thinks that you can take the objective stance towards yourself and everyone else, but table that always. Well, they're being inconsistent, because if they're saying, well, I'm just living in accordance with the facts, and the fact is that determinism is true, and therefore I'm going to take the objective attitude with respect to myself all the time. In taking the objective stance, you are being inconsistent with its thesis. So you're not actually living in accordance with the facts by taking either attitude, because you have to take, because this,
because that feature that it is deciding whether or not you want to take the determinist attitude is being. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And now she says,
yeah.
But I don't. Okay.
I just want to play. I just want to play around with this just a little bit, just in the sense that, like, it's like, okay. So can you take the objective attitude consistently while recognizing that you're not responsible at all for your adoption of the objective attitude?
To me, yes, in wisdom. That's kind of what wisdom is, right?
To be honest, Adam, I even think so. I don't know if this is like it's probably psychologically very impossible, but I think that, I mean, let's just, even if you grant that someone could actually get themselves to where they did live in the objective stance with respect to themselves or everyone else. I mean, we already said this, but they initially had to make that choice. So it's still inconsistent, qua her point. But the objective stance, it actually, the objective stance doesn't seem to necessitate that you live like a Buddhist monk and you're just experiencing all of these things washing over you. All it is that you're viewing no one, yourself included, as deserving of praise or blame or desert, and thereby viewing them, Giffin and Sommers will quibble with this, but viewing them as an object in that sense. So your question is, can you do that? And is that somehow inconsistent with even the objective stance towards yourself? It's clearly not towards others. Yeah. But could it be towards yourself? I
don't know. Like, I definitely think, like, not all the questions are resolved for me. I mean, like, I know I was all excited there, but because it's a wonderful thought. But I'm just wondering, like,
there kind of seems to be a sense in which it's not that inconsistent.
Yeah, I just wonder, like.
But that's not, I mean, just for the audience, we're not disagreeing with her overall point, because we're talking about in certain circumstances, right, Adam? You and I, we're talking about.
Well, no, I'm talking about just the idea of, like, I mean,
well,
you
she
would obviously
said,
be like,
didn't she say
the
it
first
was
transition, which would be,
what were you saying, Adam?
Sorry, I think I cut out there.
I think you did, yeah.
Yeah, but obviously there's, like, the first instant of, like, adopting the attitude, but I'm just trying to think of, like,
so you're imagining, let's take an example of someone that is born or created without the ability to take reactive attitudes. They always just live with the objective attitude. Is that some sort of a weird counterexample to her thesis?
Yes, that's exactly where I'm going with that.
Okay.
Yeah, because obviously it's unrealistic, but I'm just thinking, like,
conceptually.
Yeah, just conceptually, like, just kind of recognizing.
You know what's interesting? Here's what I think about that. It is not a counterexample, but not because it's wrong. So okay. Okay, it's not wrong because that person would be living in accordance with the facts, right? But I think that thought example, that scenario isn't actually, it kind of no longer ceases to be relevant almost, because that's not really a person, in the sense that they actually, I feel like if you're born without the ability to kind of take those reactive attitudes, then it's not, then the entire aspect of choice goes out the window. So then to say, oh, well, it's living in accordance with the facts because you never have to make the choice to do it, that's almost just saying like, that's just saying like
can
a
that person not make any choices then?
I'm just like trying to think of like back to like the robot example of just like
Yeah.
I'm just literally thinking out loud right now. So
Yeah,
this
yeah.
could go nowhere.
That's
But I'm thinking of like we created like, you know, two robots in a sense, where one was programmed to take the objective attitude from its creation.
only
Right.
the objective attitude. Yeah.
Only the objective attitude. And
Yeah, there could
another
take
one,
both.
another one that could take both.
Okay.
Yeah. So like examining like
because that's just us. That's just like, imagine a human who, right? Like that's just the same thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
So in like the case of like the robot that can only take the objective attitude and has always taken the objective attitude, it's like could that robot at that point then state as a matter of fact that its attitude is fully in accordance with the facts, and that and that is a redeeming quality of the objective attitude, in the sense that for another being that can adopt either attitude, that being would then need to undergo some sort of contradiction, in the sense that it would have to act agenically or view oneself agenically to adopt the objective attitude. But
so her claim may need modified in being the type of being that it is worth being. This is inconsistent, right? In being the type of being that like is,
you think it wouldn't worth being the objective robot then?
No, like obviously not.
I don't think it's obvious.
Well, yeah, I know, but I don't think that you. I mean, I don't.
I'll just clarify.
Yeah, but I don't think you're connecting with like. I mean, we've got this has been like the last two episodes, but I just don't think you're actually connecting with. Like, I don't know what to make of your view. I mean, we'll cut this out, but like, I don't know what to make of your view, because when I ask you to spell out the difference, you're unable to. So I don't even know, like, how you're viewing this debate still.
Sure,
but I'm saying, like, from my perspective, Adam, like, I think her thought experiment or her thesis may be like, okay, for a being who has the capacity to, or the default even to take either stance, then it is inconsistent. And for a being who actually doesn't have the ability to take either stance, it is not inconsistent, but because of a very strange setup and circumstances. Like it wouldn't connect.
But the thing about like the example though is that it just gives us like another sort of lens in which to kind of like choose between the two scenarios, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me, where it's like, okay, one could be one of these beings, and you know, we don't have the option to be one of these beings, but say we did.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And one of the benefits of being the being that, you know, adopt, I mean, there'd obviously be like, you know, tons of like, you know, obvious detractors from, you know, fully adopting the objective mind attitude, and of course, but one could point to that situation. If one were to choose between the two, you would be in that circumstance, you'd be acting agenically, in the sense that you think you have like the option to choose between the two of these. You're like, you know, but once you make that decision, then you would fully adopt one of those scenarios. You know what I mean? So it's so you can kind of like assess the two in a sense, where it's like where you would have some redeeming nature to the objective attitude, in the sense that it is in accordance with determinism. Like the attitude one has about life does, you know, accord with the facts.
I honestly,
but it's a wild thought experiment. I
need to think about it more, because the problem is, like, I've had so many just mind explosions over the past like 2.5 hours reading this paper. I don't know. Like, I don't know if, like, I get your point. I just, in order to actually know what I think about it, I'd need to think about it more. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and in Giffin, you like it too, because the thing is, like, the idea is that I think it removes that contradiction in a sense, because as beings that view ourselves agentically when making the decision, would then just like almost like the experience machine in a sense, just like get wiped and then just become that being. So like that was like a previous state in a sense. You would now be a being that is kind of remade in a sense.
Well, it would still be, wouldn't she still be able to say it would be contradictory across time though, right? Like in order to, like once you're in that state, it wouldn't be contradictory, but that seems to be kind of weak.
No, you're a different being now.
Well,
you're a different being because you're choosing between two scenarios. So like the idea is that it's not going to be robot Jordan. It's going to be just like there is like a discontinuation between like you and
you
this
could even
being
just
that you
you
would
could
adopt.
say you could, yeah, you could.
I think it would be, because currently Jordan could adopt the objective attitude, right?
It would be so stark a change as to be just like, because normally change doesn't happen like that, but this would be so stark a change as to fundamentally just alter up perhaps the majority of who you are.
Yeah, he wouldn't be able to adopt the reactive attitude anymore. So this would be like a different being in a sense.
Okay.
So
yeah, totally different.
Like because you can choose to be like, I mean you can kind of switch between attitudes right now. Like, you know, as I'm talking to you, Giffin, like you could kind of just step back for a second and then just view me as just like
what you are.
just you know, a primate babbling over here right now, or you could like really kind of connect with me and just be annoyed at me. You know what I mean? and feel deep just annoyance,
resentment. Yeah,
you know what I mean? Just so like the just
you would
like
no
like
longer
the,
be able to do that.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to do that anymore in this other scenario. It would just be like you would just hold the one kind of removed mindset of just like, you know, viewing me as, you know, a highly complex robot. So
I've got to think about it more. I think we should wrap the episode up though, because even with a little editing, it's going to be a long ass episode. Okay, this was honestly though, this was one of the biggest. I'll say for me personally, like this was one of the biggest divides between what I thought I would value in the paper coming into the episode and leaving the episode. Like for whatever reason, I got how it fit together, but it didn't fit together for me.
When I spent a good period of time today, the light bulb went off, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a good episode. Yes.
So, I was so glad we just like dug through the paper, because that was, you know, excavating, just getting that out of the paper, but it was well worth it.
He's a fun writer too.
Oh yeah, really good writer. Okay, well, I don't know how long this will end up being, but if you're still listening, thank you for doing so, and tune in next time to continue the moral responsibility series.